Hi everyone, thanks for participating in the Workout Wednesday initiative. My name is Shannon Lindsay and I am going to walk you through the solution for the week 9 challenge. Back in week 7, you all built some really beautiful reports using the Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory dataset in the challenge brought to us by David Eldersveld. This week, we are going to build on that to explore a few new features or features that are new to us in Power BI. Let's quickly have a look at the requirements before we jump into the actual build. We asked you to find a Power Query transformation that would take the raw data and change the individual lake columns into rows so that you'll end up with only 3 columns loaded in your data model. If you need any more explanation on that, you can take a look at David's video from week 7. We then asked you to add a line chart that displays the average coverage by year, forecasted out to the year 2030, to add a second line chart that also displays average coverage by year, showing anomalies at 75% sensitivity. And then we asked you to answer the 2 following questions. So number 1, what is the projected average ice coverage in 2030? And number 2, which lake contributed most to data anomalies? So let's take a look at how to do this. Alrighty, so we are here in Power BI Desktop and we are looking at the week 7 report that you all built based on David's challenge. What we're now going to do is we've got our blank canvas, we have our formatting all set up, and we are going to add our new graphics. The first thing that we need to do is to make sure that anomaly detection is turned on in Power BI Desktop. So the way that we are going to do that is by navigating to the Options and Settings under File, Options and Settings. We're going to go to Options. And from here, we're going to go to Preview Features. Anomaly Detection is a preview feature, so we're going to need to turn that on and go ahead and click OK. I would always recommend turning on the preview features. As you all know, Power BI comes out with new features every month, and it's something really fun and simple to keep up with. Just note that you do have to turn them on, and you will have to restart Power BI to use them. The next thing that I'd like us to do is to quickly take a look at the data that we have to work with. So if you formatted the data in the way that David formatted his in the week 7 challenge, we're going to have a column for year, a column for lake, and a column for coverage. So we unpivoted the data, we got everything nice and tidy in a long table, and we're looking at the year, the lake, and the coverage. Now, one thing that I do want you to note is that this year column here is currently formatted as a whole number. And in order to really do nice time intelligence, we need to make sure that this value is formatted as a date. However, you cannot just take the format here and switch it to a date. That is actually not going to do anything for us. Let's actually see what that does here. Yeah, you get this weird date error, the 1905. So we're going to switch that back to a whole number, and I'm going to show you how we can deal with that. There are a couple of different ways. The first and most efficient way would be to create a date table so that we can begin to work with a proper star schema, or rather begin to build out a proper star schema for our data. For the purposes of today, I'm going to do the quick and dirty way, and that is to add a column, a calculated column that turns the value into a date. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new column. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call this the year end date, just to make it make sense. And we're going to just turn the column of interest into a date. So the column that we're interested in is the year column. And I'm saying return the specified date in a date time format for the year column. And I want the month to be December and the day to be the end of the month. Now this is, again, the quick and dirty way to handle this. This is not the proper create data model way, but this will absolutely suffice when it comes to creating the visuals for this report. If you want to create a data model, there are a couple of different, well, There are 3 different ways that you can do that. You can import a date table from your source. You can create a DAX date table, or you can create a date table in M. For the purposes of today, we're just going to make sure that we have this date value set. So we've got our year-end date, and we will need that to be able to make the anomaly detection function properly. So step 1 is always making sure that our data is shaped in the way that it needs to be to build our visualizations. Looking back at the requirements, you will remember that the first requirement is for us to create a line chart of the average coverage by year, and we're going to do a little bit of forecasting on this line chart. So I am going to go ahead and start by dropping a line chart onto the canvas here. And I'm going to move it into the place where I want it to be. And I'm going to go ahead and add the fields as they need to be added. So I know that on my axis, I need the year. And this has automatically formatted as a date hierarchy. I'm just going to stick with year here. And my values are going to be the average coverage. Now, I have actually created a measure to do this, but you can also take the coverage, add it to the values, and select average. Now, this is something that is referred to as an implicit measure. So there's DAX that's being written behind the scenes. If you'd like to write the DAX on your own, you certainly can, and that's what you're going to need to do in the future for making efficient reports. But for the purposes of today, this implicit measure where it's been generated for us, the average of coverage, the DAX that's been written behind the scenes, this is just fine. So you will get a visual that shows you the average coverage by year for all lakes. Now, I am going to take this a couple of steps further. If you'll remember correctly, we have a trend line on our graph, and then we also have the forecasting turned on. So the trend line was a part of last week's challenge, but we'll just go ahead and add that. And we did that right here on the Analytics tab, or pane rather, and all you need to do is add a trend line. You can then specify the color, the transparency, the style, the combined series, or use highlight values. The next thing that we're going to do is here in this very same analytics pane, we are going to navigate down to forecast. And this is, funny with Power BI, you've got your scroll bar within a scroll bar, so be sure to scroll down. And we are going to add a forecast. Now, when you add a forecast, let me scroll, you have the ability to specify the forecast length and the confidence interval. Now, the length here, we asked you to forecast out to year 2030. That is what we have done. And the first part of the solution has been fulfilled. So this is pretty simple. One quick thing that I'd like to point out is you'll see here that rather than doing a whole PowerPoint background, I actually added some shapes behind the values to be able to create these nice backgrounds. But it gets a little tricky because when you click between different items that you have on your canvas, things get hidden and unhidden, and it's really sometimes challenging to see where everything is at. The best way to manage this is to go on the View tab of the ribbon, to turn on the selection pane. And what you can see here is similar to PowerPoint. All of the different orders are layered. So right now what you're seeing is my line graph that I just created. The average of coverage is selected, and you can tell because it's got these little gray handles around it. This is at the top of the pile. So this is going to be, if you're thinking about layers like moving things to front and moving things to back, just like you would in PowerPoint, here I'm specifying I want average of coverage to be in front. So if for some reason you've got different items on your canvas that are hiding each other, the selection pane is a great place to go. Now let's jump into our second report visual. The next thing that we need to do is to add a line chart. And again, we're looking at average coverage by year, and we're going to look at anomalies. So I am going to go ahead and create another line chart. To click out of that, another line chart from scratch. So we are going to make sure that we have nothing selected on our canvas so that we can add, again, a line chart. I'm going to move this into place. And here we want to look at the average coverage by year with the anomalies. Now, when we're talking about anomalies, we have to think about what kind of anomalies and what influences the outcome. And so here what we want to look at is which lake contributed the most. So How we're going to do this is, again, we're going to put our year on our axis. Now, remember, in order for this visual to work, your year your year column must be formatted as a date. This visual will not work if you put year formatted as a whole number on the axis. So keep that in mind. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and this time we'll use our explicit or our specified value for the average of values. And this value is the same. Okay, and now what you can see is a couple of things. The first is that we're not forecasting out to the year 2030, okay, where this is just the data from the beginning year, which was 1973, all the way up to 2020, and I want to turn on the anomaly detection. So there are actually a couple of different places you can do this, but where we're going to start is here in the analytics pane. We're going to turn on find anomalies, and I am going to add an anomaly. Now, the default sensitivity for the anomaly detection here is 70%. I'm going to set this to 75%. That was part of the assignment. And I want to explain the anomalies by lake. So a couple of things I want to point out here. You have the ability to change the shape of the anomaly marker, the size, the anomaly color. So there is some custom formatting you can do in here. And just another quick reminder, many of the out-of-the-box formatting options for visuals in Power BI are not going to suit you. So do not be afraid to get into this formatting pane, or in this case, we're in the analytic pane, and be able to, change things, customize things, make them work for you and in a way that makes sense for your end users. Now that we have our anomaly detection turned on, something that I want to point out is this. If you select a point in the anomaly detection, what you will see here is for the point that we have selected, you can see a description. So the average of all lakes was unexpectedly high in the year 1996, and it was above the expected range for the year. And in that year, a possible explanation that is leading to this unexpected result is the value for Lake Michigan. Now, if you click through these additional anomalies, and you can do this right here in the anomalies pane, or you can also do it by clicking through the anomalies here, you will see an explanation for each of the anomalies in that year. Now that brings us back to the point that you must have a year on the axis in order for this to work. Something that is really cool that we did not do in this challenge is that you do have the ability to take these visuals that are automatically created and add them to your report. We're not going to do that for the purposes of today, but I just want to show you all that this exists. We have two more visuals we need to add to this canvas, but before we do that, I do want to get these visuals cleaned up a little bit. So the first thing I'd like to do is to take a look at how tall each of these are, just so that I can have them lined up appropriately. So I'm going to make each of these 255. And then I am just going to scooch this down a bit, make sure things are centered. And now I'll proceed over to my table. The next thing that we're going to do is add a table that shows the minimum and maximum coverage by lake. So I'm going to start with doing a little bit differently. We're going to add our lake here. And because lake is a text value, the default variable is a table. So that's fun. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a column with coverage. And I'm going to use the implicit measure here for minimum. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an explicit measure for maximum. Now, what is this implicit versus explicit thing, and why is it important? The main reason it's important is for performance reasons. So again, when I'm talking about implicit measures, I'm talking about when we create one of these measures that's built in. Okay, but we're going to create our own measure actually for two different reasons. One is for performance, but the second is so that it can be reused, so that every single time you create a visual, you don't have to do that yourself. So I'm just going to right click here. I'm going to create a new measure, and we have minimum. I am going to call this maximum coverage. And this is going to equal the maximum of the coverage column. And that's it. That's all we need to do. So I'm going to add this maximum measure to my table. I am going to go ahead and change the precision here. I don't need any of these decimals. We'll do just a little formatting to clean this up. So we've got our min and max coverage by lake. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the total. Doesn't make sense to have totals, so I do this here on the formatting paint roller. Turn the totals off. You can see is I've got my minimum and maximum coverage by lake, and we have the ability to click through and look at each individual lake. The last thing that we're going to do is to add our smart narrative visuals. So adding the smart narrative visual will allow us to add insights that are based on the insights that exist on the page within these visuals at the time that you add the smart narratives. That's all a mouthful, but all of that is to say that these are, of course, added based upon the fact that we're looking at average of coverage. So this first one is related to our first average coverage. We're looking at the value of the average of lakes by year. And what you'll be able to see here is that this is completely customizable. So you have the opportunity to name your value. You can review the smart narrative. You can show the auto-generated values. You can edit them. This is highly editable. And something that one of our participants pointed out is that you can actually use this smart narrative in a lot of different instances. So you could potentially use it in place of using a DAX measure for a dynamic title. So you can use your smart narratives for a lot of different things. You can edit out things that you don't want, and you can also add plain text if that will help you to explain things that you need to explain to your users. You have the opportunity to add plain text and to add a value so that you can then insert values from your data and everything remains dynamic. All right, so this is our smart narrative. And then last but not least, we're going to, stuck in an evil loop here, we're going to add a back button. I am going to go to the Insert tab of the ribbon. I'm going to add a button, and we're going to add a back button to take us back to the first page of our report, and that is your Week 7 challenge. Quick reminder with these buttons, if this is the first time you're using them, we want to make sure that there is an action associated with the button. So because this is the back button, there's a default action, which is back. You can always change that depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So for example, if you wanted it to go to a different page than the existing page, you could find that page here. You can add a tooltip. Take me to Week 7. And this provides a little bit more of a customized experience for your viewers. And that is it. That is your solution for Week 9. I hope that you all have learned a little something, that you've had a good time navigating through Power BI and understanding what the asks of the challenge are. And most importantly, I hope that you are finding some things that are going to be applicable in your work or in your life. We hope that this experience makes things easier for you. So thanks so much for joining us. Please make sure that you share your report, and we'll see you next week for Week 10. Have a good one.